The overtime hours were never about money. I can still see Greg hunched over his laptop that January night, calculator beside him, that little crease between his eyebrows that meant he'd found something that didn't add up. Watching him discover those missing $3,000 on my W-2 was like watching a bomb timer tick down to zero. He had no idea what he'd just stumbled onto, but I knew my carefully constructed world was about to explode. I should have known better than to marry an accountant. Greg was everything a woman was supposed to want. Stable, reliable, made good money, brought me coffee every morning without being asked. My friends all said I'd won the lottery when he proposed after 3 years of dating. "He's so devoted," they'd gush. "The way he takes notes about everything you say." That's true love. If only they knew those notes would be my downfall. I met Evan Prescott when they reorganized our departments at the insurance company. He was brought in from the Chicago office to head up the new claims division, and suddenly my predictable days of processing paperwork turned into something else entirely. He was everything Greg wasn't. Spontaneous, charming, the kind of guy who'd suggest drinks after work on a Tuesday just because. "You seem too interesting to be stuck in Raleigh forever," he said during our first team meeting. And something inside me that had been dormant for years suddenly woke up. He was 41, with silver at his temples and a wedding ring he twisted when he was thinking. That should have been my first warning, but instead it made him safer somehow. We were both married, both just looking for interesting conversation. What could possibly happen? The first time we went for coffee, it was purely professional. He wanted to understand the workflow, he said, get to know his team better. We sat in the break room talking about insurance protocols and claim processing times. But then the conversation shifted. He asked about my life, my dreams, what I'd wanted to be before I ended up behind a desk. "A travel writer," I admitted, surprising myself. I hadn't thought about that in years. I was going to see the world and write about it. Instead, I saw Raleigh and wrote about deductibles. "It's not too late," he said, and the way he looked at me made me believe it. Greg never asked about my dreams anymore. Why would he? We'd achieved them all according to his spreadsheet. Marriage by 32, check. House in the suburbs, check. Stable careers, check. We were living the American dream, if the American dream felt like slowly suffocating in a beige house with good resale value. The thing about affairs is they don't start with a decision to cheat. They start with a compliment that makes you remember you're more than someone's wife. They start with conversations that don't revolve around whose turn it is to buy toilet paper. They start when someone looks at you and sees Jessica, not just Mrs. Greg Whitfield, CPA's wife. Our coffee meetings became a regular thing. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 3:15, we'd discuss departmental integration, while really talking about books, movies, places we'd traveled. Evan had been to 30 countries with his job. He'd eaten street food in Bangkok, watched the sunrise at Machu Picchu, gotten lost in the Medinas of Marrakesh. "What's the furthest you've been from Raleigh?" he asked one afternoon. "Cancun, our honeymoon." I stirred my coffee, remembering how Greg had spent half the trip on his laptop, handling some client emergency. "We stayed at the resort the whole time." "That's not travel, that's just sitting by a different pool." His hand brushed mine as he reached for the sugar. "You deserve to see the world, Jessica." The first time he used my name like that, soft and full of possibility, I felt like I was 18 again. I was 36 years old, and I felt invisible. Greg could go days without really looking at me, lost in his spreadsheets and client files. Sure, he'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, ask about my day when he remembered to look up from his phone, make love to me on schedule every Saturday night like it was another item on his to-do list. But when was the last time he'd really seen me? Saturday nights. God, the predictability of it all. Greg would close his laptop at exactly 9:30, shower, and climb into bed smelling like the same Irish spring soap he'd used since college. He'd touch me the same way, kiss me in the same spots, finish in the same 12 to 15 minutes he'd apparently decided was sufficient for marital relations. Then he'd spoon me for exactly 5 minutes before rolling over to his side of the bed. "That was nice," he'd always say, like I'd just served him a decent meatloaf. Nice. Our entire life was nice. Nice house, nice cars, nice routine that never varied. We ate dinner at 6:30. We watched the news at 7. We went to his parents' house every other Sunday and mine on the alternates. We had sex on Saturdays, groceries on Sundays, date night every second Friday at the same 3 restaurants we'd been rotating through for years. I could predict every word that would come out of his mouth. "How was your day, honey?" at 6:15. "Should we watch something?" at 7:30. I'm thinking of turning in early at 9:45. We were living the same day over and over, and he seemed perfectly content to do it for the next 40 years. Evan saw me. The late night started 3 weeks later. This part was trickier, but Evan had thought of everything. We actually did work late, just not as late as I claimed. We'd stay until 6:30, 7 at the latest, visible at our desks for anyone who might check. Then we'd slip out to his apartment 10 minutes from the office, and I'd be home by 9:30, claiming exhaustion from all those extra hours. The first time we crossed the line was after the quarterly meeting in October. Everyone else had gone home, and we were reviewing the numbers in his office. He was standing behind me, pointing at something on the computer screen, and I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and woody, nothing like Greg's Irish Spring. "You're brilliant," he whispered, and his breath on my neck made me shiver. "Do you know that? The way you caught that error in the Peterson claim saved the company thousands." I turned to respond and found his face inches from mine. The kiss was inevitable, electric, wrong in every way that made it feel right. His hands tangled in my hair, and I forgot about Greg, about marriage, about everything except the heat of Evan's mouth on mine. "We shouldn't," I gasped when we finally broke apart. "No, we shouldn't," he agreed, then kissed me again. That night I went home to Greg with another man's taste on my lips. He was at the kitchen table, surrounded by tax forms for his clients, and barely looked up when I walked in. "There's pasta in the fridge," he said. "I already ate. This Morrison account is killing me." I watched him work, waiting for him to notice something different about me. Surely it showed on my face. The guilt, the exhilaration, the knowledge that I'd just blown up our life. But he just kept entering numbers, occasionally pushing his glasses up his nose in that way he'd done since I'd met him. "How was the overtime?" he asked finally. "Productive," I said, and the lie came so easily it scared me. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. No suspicious texts because we used the company's internal messaging system. No unexplained charges because Evan paid for everything. No changes in my behavior because I'd learned to compartmentalize perfectly. At home, I was still Jessica Whitfield, dutiful wife. At work, in those stolen hours, I was someone else entirely. Our first time at his apartment was awkward and thrilling. He had expensive furniture, real art on the walls, a view of downtown. Everything was sophisticated, adult in a way our suburban house with its Pottery Barn catalog furniture could never be. "I haven't done this before," I said as he poured wine that cost more than Greg spent on bottles for special occasions. "Neither have I," he lied smoothly, and I let myself believe him. The sex was different than with Greg. Urgent, passionate, tinged with the danger of discovery. Evan knew things, did things that Greg would never think to try. He made me feel desired, not just available. When he looked at me, really looked at me, I felt like a woman worth risking everything for. Afterward, lying in his king-size bed, I studied the ceiling and tried to feel guilty. Instead, I felt alive for the first time in years. "What are you thinking?" Evan traced patterns on my bare shoulder. "That I should feel worse than I do." "Why?" He propped himself up on an elbow. "We're not hurting anyone. What they don't know can't hurt them." It became my mantra. What Greg doesn't know can't hurt him. I repeated it every time I bought new lingerie he'd never see, every time I shaved my legs on a Tuesday, every time I came home glowing from another man's bed. The lies multiplied like cells dividing. Working late became team-building dinner, became conference in Charlotte. Each deception required two more to support it. I created fake work friends, invented office drama, manufactured crises that required my immediate attention. "Your job is really picking up," Greg commented one night in November. "We were eating takeout again because I'd been too exhausted to cook." "Maybe you should ask for that raise we talked about." "Maybe," I said, thinking about how Evan had bent me over his kitchen counter an hour earlier. "I'm proud of you." Greg reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I know I get caught up in tax season, but I see how hard you're working. We should take a vacation when things calm down. Maybe Europe? You always wanted to see Paris." The sincerity in his voice made me want to crawl under the table. Here he was, planning trips to give me something I'd claimed to want, while I was getting everything I actually wanted from another man. The Saturdays were Evan's idea. "Tell him it's for a big client presentation," he suggested, his hand on my thigh as we sat in his car during lunch. "Government contracts require weekend prep sometimes." Greg bought it completely. Why wouldn't he? I'd never given him a reason to doubt me. I was the woman who complained when restaurants got my order wrong but never raised my voice at home. I was predictable, stable Jessica, who'd fallen for his proposal at exactly the right time in our relationship timeline. Those Saturdays became our time to pretend we were a real couple. We'd drive to Durham or Chapel Hill, walk around holding hands, have long lunches at restaurants where no one knew us. He'd tell me about his travels, his dreams of early retirement, how he'd married his college girlfriend because it was expected but never felt the spark. "Not like this," he'd say, kissing me in broad daylight like we had every right to. I've never felt anything like this. I ate it up like the starved woman I was. Every compliment, every touch, every time he chose me over his regular life felt like validation. See, I wasn't boring. I wasn't just another suburban wife sliding toward middle age. I was special, desirable, worth risking a marriage for. The irony was that the affair made me a better wife in some ways. The guilt manifested as elaborate dinners when I wasn't working late. I initiated sex more often, trying to prove to myself that I still wanted Greg. I even suggested we try new things, though he looked at me like I'd suggested we rob a bank. "We don't need all that," he said, patting my hand. "What we have is perfect." Perfect. There was that word again, the one that made me want to scream. Our perfect life in our perfect house with our perfect routine that was slowly strangling me. My father would have seen through it immediately. That man could smell deception from a mile away, probably from all those years in the Rangers. But Greg? Greg trusted me the way he trusted his calculations, completely because the numbers had always added up before. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Evan and I took a risk. Instead of going to his apartment, we got a hotel room in the middle of the day. The Quality Inn off Highway 40, paid in cash, checked in under false names like we were in some cheap thriller. "This is crazy," I laughed as he fumbled with the key card. "Good crazy," he said, pulling me inside. We spent 3 hours in that room, ordering room service and pretending we were different people. He talked about leaving his wife, about us running away together. "Where would we go?" I asked, tracing circles on his chest. "Anywhere. Barcelona, Prague, Tokyo. Imagine it, Jess. No more hiding, no more sneaking around, just us." "What about money?" "Jobs." "I've got savings." "We'd figure it out." He kissed my forehead. "Don't you want more than this? More than Raleigh and insurance forms and predictable Greg with his predictable life?" I did. God help me, I did. But wanting and doing were different things. I had a life, a history, parents who loved Greg like a son. How could I just walk away from all of that? "After the holidays," I said, the way I always did when he pushed. "Let's get through the holidays." But the holidays brought their own complications. Greg's entire family descended for Thanksgiving, and I had to play the perfect wife while my phone burned with messages from Evan. I smiled through dinner, helped his mother in the kitchen, listened to his father's stories about tax law changes, all while thinking about the taste of another man's skin. "You seem distracted, dear," Greg's mother commented while we were washing dishes. "Just tired from work," I said automatically. She studied me with those sharp eyes Greg had inherited. "You know, when Greg was little, he used to organize his Halloween candy by type and then calculate the optimal consumption rate to make it last until Christmas." "That sounds like him," I managed. "He's always been methodical," she continued. "Careful. It takes a special kind of person to appreciate that quality." Was that a warning? A test? I couldn't tell, but I felt exposed, like she could see right through me to the hotel key card still in my purse. 4 months in, I was getting careless. The thrill of sneaking around had become addictive. Every time Greg kissed me goodbye without suspicion, every time he documented another late night without question, I felt powerful. I was living a double life right under the nose of a man who made his living finding discrepancies, and he had no clue. December brought the company Christmas party, and Evan's wife attended. She was exactly what I'd pictured. Thin, blonde, yoga-toned, with a smile that never reached her eyes. She air-kissed everyone and complained about the wine selection while Evan stood beside her looking trapped. "So you're Jessica," she said when we were introduced. "Evan's mentioned you're doing wonderful work on his team." "Thank you," I managed, hyper-aware of every place her husband had touched me. "We should have lunch sometime," she continued. "I like to know the people who keep my husband at the office so late." My blood turned to ice, but Evan smoothly intervened. "Darling, you know government contracts don't care about normal business hours." She laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. "Of course." "Well, Jessica, lovely to meet you. Though I'm sure we'll be seeing less of each other after the new year. Evans requested a transfer back to Chicago." The room tilted. He hadn't mentioned any transfer. I looked at him, but he was studiously avoiding my gaze, suddenly fascinated by the appetizer table. I excused myself and spent the rest of the party in the bathroom, trying to process this information. Chicago. He was leaving, going back to his real life while I stayed here in the wreckage of mine. When I confronted him the next week, he shrugged it off. "It's not final. And even if it happens, we'll figure it out. Long distance can work." "Long distance?" I laughed, but it came out bitter. "We can barely manage short distance without getting caught." "What do you want me to say, Jess?" "That I'll divorce my wife, throw away 20 years, lose half my assets? For what?" "For what?" I repeated, stunned. "For me. For us. For all those dreams you talked about." He sighed, running his hands through that perfect salt and pepper hair. "Come on, we both knew what this was. You're married too, remember?" But it wasn't the same. I'd been willing to consider blowing up my life for him. He was just bored and I was convenient. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I started to resent Greg for it. How could he not see what was right in front of him? How could he care so little that he never questioned why I suddenly needed designer blouses for a job I'd had for 8 years? Part of me wanted him to catch me, just to prove he was paying attention. But he didn't. He just kept making his notes, filing our joint taxes, planning our retirement. We'd have the same conversations about the same topics while I counted down the hours until I could see Evan again. Greg would talk about maximizing our 401k contributions while I was thinking about the way Evan's hands felt on my skin. "You're distracted tonight," Greg said once over dinner, and my heart stopped. But then he added, "Must be all that overtime. Maybe you should ask for a raise." A raise. He thought I was killing myself for a promotion while I was really just killing our marriage in 2-hour increments. Greg did try in his way. He suggested date nights at new restaurants, bought me flowers on random Tuesdays, even signed us up for ballroom dancing lessons. "You said you wanted to try new things," he said hopefully. But I didn't want to foxtrot with my husband. I wanted to feel alive, and I'd convinced myself that feeling only came from hotel rooms and secret meetings and the constant adrenaline of almost getting caught, The truth about affairs is they're like drugs. You need more and more to get the same high. By December, 4 nights a week wasn't enough. The Saturdays weren't enough. Evan started talking about leaving his wife, about us starting fresh somewhere new. Dallas, maybe, or Atlanta. Anywhere but Raleigh with its suffocating suburban predictability. But after the Christmas party revelation, everything shifted. He became distant, started canceling our meetings, claimed his wife was getting suspicious. The man who'd promised me Barcelona was now worried about his retirement portfolio. "What about Greg?" I asked one night, wrapped in hotel sheets we'd paid for in cash. It was a few days before Christmas, and I'd told Greg I was shopping for his gift. "What about him?" Evan traced patterns on my shoulder, but his touch felt mechanical now, like he was already pulling away. "He'll be fine. Guys like Greg always are. He'll find another nice girl, probably upgrade to someone who appreciates what she's got." The cruelty of that comment should have woken me up. Instead, I laughed, even as something inside me broke. New Year's Eve was the last time. We met at his apartment while Greg thought I was at my book club's annual party. Evan was different that night, rougher, more demanding, like he was trying to store up memories. "This is it, isn't it?" I asked afterward. "The transfer came through," he said, not looking at me. "We leave next week." "We?" "My wife and I." He finally met my eyes. "She's excited. Fresh start and all that." I wanted to scream, to throw things, to demand he acknowledge what we'd had. Instead, I got dressed in silence, letting the reality sink in. I was 36 years old, getting dressed in another woman's husband's bedroom, about to go home to my own husband, who thought I was discussing wine and literature with suburban housewives. "Jess." "Don't," I cut him off. "Just don't." Christmas came and went. Greg bought me a spa day package, thoughtfully noting that I seemed tense from all the extra work. I bought him a new calculator, top of the line, and watched him add it to his home office setup with the same methodical care he applied to everything. "I love you," he said that night, pulling me close in bed. The Christmas tree lights from downstairs cast shadows on our bedroom wall, and for a moment I remembered why I'd married him. He was safe, steady, the kind of man who'd never leave me standing alone in another man's apartment. "Love you too," I replied automatically, already calculating how many days until Evan came back from his holiday trip to see his in-laws. Except he wasn't coming back. Not to me. I spent the first week of January in a fog. I went to work, came home on time, made dinner, asked Greg about his day. I was the perfect wife I hadn't been in months, and he noticed. "You seem different," he commented over pot roast, a meal I'd actually cooked from scratch. "More relaxed." Did they finally finish that big project? "Yeah," I lied. "All done." He smiled, that genuine Greg smile that crinkled his eyes. "Good. I missed you." The words hung between us. He'd missed me while I was in the same room, lying next to him in bed, sitting across from him at dinner. He'd missed the woman I used to be, and I'd been too busy becoming someone else to notice. "I was thinking," he continued, "maybe we should take that Europe trip this spring. You know, before tax season gets too crazy next year." "Maybe," I said, pushing food around my plate. "Or we could finally start talking about kids," he added quietly. "I know we said 35, but we're past that now. If we're going to do it, kids. With Greg." The thought should have thrilled me or terrified me, but I felt nothing. I was hollow, scraped clean by months of lies and the brutal reality that I'd meant nothing to the man I'd risked everything for. Then January arrived, and with it tax season. I'd been so careful about everything else, but I'd forgotten about the money. Those 141 hours of overtime I'd claimed to work but never logged. $3,000 that should have been on my W-2 but wasn't, because you can't get paid for hours you spent in another man's bed. I watched Greg's face change as he reviewed the documents that night. The little frown, The double check of his calculations, the way he pulled up his phone to cross-reference those careful notes he'd been taking all along. "Jess?" He looked up, confusion all over his face. "Your W-2 seems off. Did something change with your pay structure?" My mind raced through possible explanations. Unpaid overtime, salary adjustment, clerical error. But I knew Greg too well. He'd want to call HR, get it corrected, ensure our taxes were filed properly. He'd dig and dig until every number made sense, because that's what Greg did. I need to check something at work," I managed. "There might have been a mix-up with the new system." He made another note. "Okay, but we need to figure this out before we file." $3,000 is a significant discrepancy. Significant discrepancy. If only he knew. I texted Evan from the bathroom, hands shaking. "He's noticed the overtime pay issue. What do I do?" The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before his response came through. "Not my problem." Figure it out. That's when I understood what I'd thrown away my marriage for. Not love, not passion, not a better life. Just a man who was bored at work and thought the married admin assistant would be an easy conquest. Greg was still at his computer when I came back, cross-referencing dates and hours with the dedication of someone who genuinely cared about getting things right. He'd pulled up spreadsheets going back months, color-coded and organized, because of course he had. "I've been thinking," he said without looking up, "maybe I should call your HR department myself. If they made this big of an error, who knows what else they might have messed up." The walls were closing in. I could feel my double life collapsing, could see the exact moment when all those careful notes would suddenly form a pattern he couldn't ignore. The new clothes, the late nights, the missing money. It would all make horrible sense. "No," I said too quickly. "I mean, let me handle it. It's probably just a system glitch from the department reorganization." He finally looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in months. And I saw it. Not suspicion yet, but something shifting behind his eyes. The first crack in his absolute trust. "Okay," he said slowly, "but we need to get it sorted this week. I don't want any issues with the IRS." Of course he didn't. Greg would never risk a tax problem. He'd rather risk our marriage without even knowing it. That night, lying next to him, I listened to his steady breathing and tried to figure out how I'd gotten here. How Jessica Miller, the girl who'd been raised by a former ranger to value honor and honesty, had become this person. How I'd traded a man who loved me for one who saw me as a convenient distraction. But even then, with disaster looming, I couldn't stop. The addiction was too strong. I went to work the next day and told Evan we needed to cool things off until I figured out the tax situation. "Whatever," he shrugged, already scrolling through his phone. "Probably for the best, anyway. My wife's been asking questions, just like that. 4 months of risking everything, and he dismissed me like I was canceling a lunch appointment." I spent the next 2 weeks trying to create a paper trail that would explain the missing hours. Fake comp time forms, backdated requests for unpaid leave, anything that might satisfy Greg's need for documentation. But I knew it was hopeless. You can't fool someone who makes their living finding lies in numbers. The investigator he hired was named Jim something. I never learned his last name, only that he was thorough in a way that made my father look careless. Within a month, he had everything. The hotel receipts Evan had paid for, but I'd been careless enough to sign. The security footage from our office showing us leaving together. The testimony from co-workers who'd noticed things I thought we'd hidden. But it was worse than just evidence of an affair. Jim had talked to people, built a timeline, created a whole narrative of my deception. He'd interviewed the cleaning lady who'd seen us kissing in Evan's office. The bartender at the hotel bar who remembered us because I'd spilled red wine on my blouse and Evan had helped me clean it up in a way that made our relationship obvious. The desk clerk at the Quality Inn who'd noticed we never had luggage. Greg had hired him in early February right after the tax discovery. For 3 weeks, while I was trying to create fake overtime records and manufacturing explanations, My husband was systematically documenting the destruction of our marriage. "Did you know he has a wife?" Greg asked one evening in late February. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the same place we'd shared thousands of meals. "Did you know and just not care?" I couldn't answer. What could I say? That I'd known and convinced myself it didn't matter? That I'd worn another woman's husband's marks on my body and felt proud of them? "His wife called me," Greg continued, "after my investigator contacted her. She wanted to compare notes. Apparently, you're not his first affair. Not even his second." The words hit like physical blows. I thought of all those times Evan had said I was special, different, worth risking everything for. Just another lie I'd swallowed because it tasted better than the truth. Greg presented it all to me on a Friday evening in February. Not dramatically, not with anger or tears. He just laid out the printed reports on our dining room table like he was showing me tax documents, each piece of evidence tagged with sticky notes in his neat handwriting. "I need you to leave," he said when I couldn't deny it anymore. "I'll have your things sent to wherever you're staying." "Greg, please." It meant nothing. It was just, "Don't." He held up a hand. "Whatever you were going to say, just don't." You had 141 chances to tell me the truth. That's how many hours you pretended to work late. I counted. Of course he counted. I moved back in with my parents that night. My father opened the door, took one look at my face, and stepped aside without a word. Later, I heard him on the phone with Greg. "You did the right thing, son." Clean break is best. Son. He'd never called Greg that when we were married. The divorce was swift and brutal. Turns out the prenup I'd signed without reading properly had an infidelity clause. I got nothing except my personal belongings and the knowledge that I'd destroyed a good man for afternoon quickies with someone who forgot my name the minute I became inconvenient. Greg's doing well now. I know because my mother keeps me informed, whether I want to hear it or not. He met someone at a professional conference last year. Another accountant who appreciates his note-taking and methodical nature. They're engaged, planning a small wedding in Asheville. "She's prettier than you," my mother said last week, not unkindly, but with that matter-of-fact tone she uses for observations. "And younger. But mainly she's grateful for what she has. Her name is Sarah, and she's 32. The same age I was when I stood up in front of our families and promised to love and honor Greg forever. She posts pictures of him on social media with captions like, "My rock," and "so blessed." She brings him lunch at the office during tax season. She frames the little notes he leaves her. They're buying a house together, something modern with lots of windows. Not like our colonial with its practical floor plan and good resale value. I drove by it once, couldn't help myself. He was out front planting flowers. Something he'd never done when we were married. She came out with lemonade, and he swept her into a kiss that looked nothing like our scheduled Saturday night encounters. He looked happy. Really happy. Not just content or comfortable. The kind of happy I'd been chasing in hotel rooms, and another man's apartment. The kind of happy he deserved to be with me if I'd just opened my eyes. Evan's still married, still working at the same company. I heard he's moved on to a new admin assistant. Some 25-year-old fresh out of college who probably thinks she's special too. Me? I'm 39, living in a studio apartment in Durham, working retail because no one wants to hire an admin who got fired for stealing time. That's what they called it in the official termination paperwork. Time theft. As if I could ever steal back those hours, those chances, that trust I threw away. Sometimes I drive past our old house. There are new curtains in the windows now, and the garden Greg never had time for is thriving under his fiancée's care. They look happy through the windows, sharing dinner at the same table where he laid out the evidence of my betrayal. I want to hate him for moving on so easily, for replacing me like I was just another spreadsheet error to be corrected. But the truth is, he didn't replace me. He upgraded to someone who understood what she had before it was gone. My father was right about Greg all those years ago. He was a good man who treated me the way I deserved. The problem was, I stopped deserving it the moment I decided that stability was boring, and attention from a stranger was worth more than love from my husband. Now I'm the cautionary tale my married friends whisper about at book clubs. The woman who had everything and threw it away for nothing. The one who learned too late that some mistakes can't be fixed, no matter how good you are with numbers. Greg was right to count those 141 hours. Each one was a choice, a betrayal, a step away from the life we'd built together. I spent them all, and in the end, the cost was everything. The affair meant nothing. Losing Greg meant everything. I just figured it out in the wrong order.